Sir, I need you to step aside, right now.
Marcus Whitfield didn't move. He looked at the woman behind the podium, at the badge pinned crooked on her blazer, and said nothing for a moment, because he had learned a long time ago that silence made people show you who they really were. "Did you hear me?" Meg Carter's voice climbed half an octave. "Step aside." "I heard you," Marcus said. "I'm just waiting to understand why." Behind him, the boarding line had already begun to still. A woman lowered her coffee. A man reached for his phone before he even knew why. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a crowd right before it decides to watch something, and it fell now, fast, the way weather changes over open water. Meg held his boarding pass up like evidence. Same-day cash ticket, first class. She said it like the words themselves were the accusation. "You expect me to believe that's legitimate?" "It's legitimate," Marcus said. "Scan it again." "I don't need to scan it again." She turned it over in her fingers, hunting for a flaw the way people hunt for permission. "I've seen this before," she said, quieter now, almost to herself. "People don't just walk up and buy a seat like this." "I paid for it," Marcus said. "That's how it happens." A few passengers behind him exchanged a glance, the kind that says, "Here we go," without a single word spoken. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody stepped back either. They just watched, phones rising slowly from pockets like something instinctive, something that happens before people decide to let it happen. Marcus had been standing in this exact line 11 minutes earlier, unremarkable, jacket worn soft at the elbows, the kind of man airports are built to move through quickly and forget. He hadn't asked for attention. He rarely did. He'd watched, the way he always watched when he came through a terminal like this one, quietly, without announcing who he was to anyone, how the agents smiled at some passengers and clipped their words for others. He'd filed it away the way he filed everything away. Then it had been his turn. That was when the smile at the podium had disappeared. "Ma'am," Marcus said, calm as still water, "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to verify a boarding pass your system already scanned once. Don't tell me how to do my job." "I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking for 30 seconds. She didn't give him 30 seconds. She gave him something else instead, a look he had seen more times in 58 years than he could count, the look that arrives at a decision before the evidence does. Her grip tightened on the paper in her hand. "I think you printed this yourself," she said, loud enough now for the whole gate to hear. A murmur moved through the line, small and electric. "I think," Marcus said quietly, "you should be careful what you do next." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. There's a difference, and in about a minute you're going to learn it." Somewhere behind the podium, unseen by either of them, a gate agent named Priya Anand had gone very still, her hand hovering near the intercom, watching this unfold with the particular helplessness of someone new enough to know something is wrong and not yet senior enough to stop it. Marcus did not raise his voice. He rarely did. His daughter was 3 time zones away, in a hospital waiting room, waiting on a consult that couldn't be rescheduled, waiting on a father who had never once in her life missed something that mattered. And none of that showed on his face now, because showing it would have handed this woman exactly the reaction she seemed to be hunting for. "Finish that sentence," Marcus said softly. "The one you're not saying. Everyone here already hears it anyway." Meg's jaw tightened. She didn't finish it. She didn't need to. Instead, she did something faster, something final. She tore the boarding pass down the middle, once, then again, and let the pieces fall between them onto the carpet like pale confetti. For a second, nobody breathed. "You just made a very expensive mistake," Marcus said, and there was no anger in it, which somehow made it worse. "Security!" Meg's voice cracked across the gate, aimed at a guard stationed near the jet bridge. "I need this man removed, now." The guard, young, broad-shouldered, uncertain, started forward. Marcus did not resist. He simply looked past Meg, past the guard, toward the jet bridge doors, where somewhere on the other side of them sat an aircraft that would not, in a few short minutes, be going anywhere at all. though not one person standing in that terminal understood why, yet. Because on the other side of that door, in the cockpit of Flight 2281, a captain was about to hear a name over his headset that would stop him cold. If you were standing in that line right now, phone halfway to your pocket, watching a stranger's boarding pass torn in half in front of you, would you have said something, or would you have just watched, like everyone else? Before we see what happens next, if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter how they look or what they're wearing, subscribe to this channel. We bring you powerful stories where truth rises, justice prevails, and every verdict has a voice. Now, let's continue. The guard's hand closed around Marcus's arm before he'd taken a full step. "Sir, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making it anything," Marcus said. "I'm standing here." Meg had already turned to the agent beside her, a younger man named Dale who'd been half watching a football score on his phone until 30 seconds ago. "Get gate ops on the line," she said. "Tell them we've got a fraud attempt at A23. Dale hesitated, phone still in his hand. "You want me to say what? Fraud? Now." He made the call. Marcus heard the word repeated into the radio and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a word like that once it started moving through a system built to believe it. Behind the ropes, the terminal had stopped pretending to mind its own business. An older man in a suit leaned toward the woman beside him, coffee in hand, and murmured something about how these things always happened right before boarding, as if he'd seen the pattern 100 times and was only now getting to enjoy it live. A young woman with a ring light clipped to her phone case had already gone live, narrating in a low, excited whisper to whoever was watching on the other end. A mother pulled her son's shoulder toward her hip and told him to stop staring, though she didn't stop watching herself. "He doesn't look dangerous," a man near the window said, mostly to himself, mostly ignored. Marcus heard all of it and answered none of it. He'd learned long ago that a crowd narrating a scene wasn't the same as a crowd understanding one. "You people always have a story," Meg said, not quite to him, not quite to the crowd either, pitched somewhere in between, for whoever was listening. "Cash, first class, no bag checked. I've flagged 3 of these this year alone." "Then you know how to clear one," Marcus said. "Call the number on the reservation, ask for the confirmation code. You'll have your answer before that plane pushes back." She didn't call the number, she looked at the guard instead. "Travis, walk him to the door." Travis Boyle didn't move right away. He was 26, 2 years on the job, and something about the calm and the man standing in front of him didn't match anything he'd been trained to expect from someone trying to talk their way onto a flight they didn't belong on. His hand tightened, then loosened, uncertain of its own instructions. "Sir," he said quietly, leaning in so only Marcus could hear, "is there something I should know here?" Marcus looked at him for a moment before answering. "Only if you're willing to listen." Travis didn't have a response for that. He kept his hand where it was, but the grip had changed. No longer a man following an order, more a man waiting to see if he'd been given the wrong one. "Ma'am, maybe we just verify it first," came a voice from behind the podium. Priya Anand had stepped forward without meaning to raise her hand at all. It had simply gone up, the way a hand does when the rest of the body hadn't caught up to the decision yet. "It'll take 2 minutes. I can pull the reservation myself." "Sit down, Priya. I'm just saying," I said sit down. Meg didn't look at her when she said it. She was watching Marcus, the way you watch something you've already decided to be right about, daring it to prove otherwise so you can enjoy being right twice. Priya sat. Her hands stayed on the keyboard, unmoving, the reservation screen glowing in front of her, one click away from an answer nobody wanted to hear yet. The overhead speaker crackled. "Final boarding call for Flight 2281 to Los Angeles. All remaining passengers, please proceed to gate A23. "You still have time to fix this," Marcus said. "Is that a threat?" "No. It's the last opportunity I'm going to offer you. Power doesn't reveal character," he added, quiet enough that only the people closest to him caught it. "It reveals choices. You're making yours right now, in front of every camera in this terminal. Something in Meg's expression flickered, not fear exactly, something closer to the recognition that the ground under an argument had shifted without her permission. She covered it fast, the way people do when they've spent a career learning not to let a crack show. "Take him," she said to Travis. "Now." Travis's hand found Marcus's arm again, firmer this time, apologetic in a way his voice wasn't allowed to be. "Come on, sir." Marcus let himself be turned. Behind him, Meg reached for the torn boarding pass on the podium, gathered the pieces, and held them up for the phones like a verdict already delivered. "This is what happens," she announced, to no one and everyone, when people think they can walk in here with cash and a story. The businessman near the ropes lowered his coffee, uneasy now instead of amused. The mother pulled her son a half-step closer. The young woman streaming the confrontation didn't say another word. She simply zoomed in, the viewer count climbing faster than she could read it. 300 feet away, in the cockpit of Flight 2281, Captain Hank Doyle sat with his headset half on, running through a final systems check with his first officer, when the radio crackled through. "Gate ops to flight deck. Be advised, passenger under fraud investigation, refusing to leave gate. Possible delay." "Name?" Doyle asked, more out of habit than urgency. "Whitfield. Marcus Whitfield." Doyle didn't respond right away. His hand, halfway to adjusting a dial, stopped where it was. "Captain?" the first officer said, glancing over. Doyle pulled the headset fully off one ear. "Repeat the name." "Whitfield. Marcus Whitfield. Being escorted out under a fraud flag at A23. For a moment, the cockpit was silent, except for the low hum of the auxiliary power unit. Doyle stared straight ahead through the windscreen at nothing in particular, doing the math on a name he hadn't heard spoken out loud in almost 20 years. Not because he'd forgotten it, but because he'd never once expected to hear it attached to the word fraud, on a gate radio, on his own flight. "Do not close that door," he said, already unbuckling. Travis walked him past the ropes, at a pace slower than the crowd wanted. Nobody was in a hurry to watch exactly. They simply weren't willing to look away either, and the two things pulled against each other the whole length of the gate. "You're going to remember this day," Marcus said, quiet enough that only Travis could hear it. "Not because of anything I do, because of what you're doing right now." Travis's grip loosened, not enough to let go, just enough to notice he had. Near the podium, Meg was still holding the torn pieces of the boarding pass, turning them slightly for whoever was filming, narrating her own version of events into a small crowd that had started, without deciding to, dividing itself into two kinds of people, the ones nodding along and the ones going quiet in a different way than before. "He tried to push past me," Meg said to a woman with a phone raised at eye level. "I've handled these before. You develop an instinct." A man near the window lowered his own phone half an inch. "He didn't push past anybody," he said. Not loud, but not quiet either. He just stood there. Meg didn't answer him. She had already moved on to the next sentence in the version of the story she needed the room to believe, the one where she'd been the one in danger. Marcus reached the edge of the gate area, close enough now to see the jet bridge doors and, beyond the small window in them, the shape of the aircraft waiting on the other side. He thought about how far his daughter's hospital was from wherever this plane eventually landed, if it landed with him on it or not, and he let the thought pass through him the way water passes through a hand, present, cold, gone. "Man," Priya said again, standing now, her voice carrying further than she meant it to. "I pulled the reservation. It's legitimate. It's been confirmed since 11 this morning." The gate went quieter than it had been all afternoon. Meg turned. "I told you to sit down. I did what you told me to for the last 10 minutes, Priya said. "I'm done doing that." For a moment, nobody moved, including Meg, whose mouth opened around the start of a sentence that didn't finish itself. Travis's hand, still on Marcus's arm, had gone still entirely now, no longer guiding him anywhere. That was the moment the jet bridge door opened from the other side. A man in a captain's uniform stepped through it fast enough that his hat nearly caught on the frame. scanning the gate the way pilots scan instrument panels, quickly, completely, missing nothing. He stopped when he found what he was looking for. He was looking at Marcus. "Captain," Meg started, already reorganizing her sentence for a new audience. "We've got a situation with a passenger who..." "Sir." The word cut across her, aimed past her entirely, and it didn't sound like a word gate agents were used to hearing directed at someone standing beside a security guard. "Are you all right?" Marcus looked at him for a long second. Something in his face, held carefully still for the last 15 minutes, loosened by a fraction. "Hank," he said. "It's been a while." The captain's eyes moved from Marcus's face to Travis's hand, still resting on his arm, and something in his posture changed, in a way the whole gate could see, even if they didn't understand it yet. A straightening. A decision, arriving, and setting immediately into motion. "Let go of him," Doyle said. Travis let go. Meg's mouth opened again. This time, nothing came out at all. Doyle didn't wait for an explanation. He walked past Meg, the way you walk past a chair that's in your way, and he stood in front of Marcus with the kind of stillness men learn in places louder and more dangerous than an airport gate. "They told me a passenger was being removed for fraud," Doyle said. "They said the name was Whitfield." He shook his head once, like a man checking a number twice because the first answer didn't seem possible. "I didn't believe it until I said it out loud." "Believe it," Marcus said. "It happened fast. It shouldn't have happened at all." Doyle turned finally to look at Meg directly, and whatever warmth had been in his voice from Marcus left it entirely. "You tore up his boarding pass." It wasn't a question. Meg answered it like one anyway. "He came up with a cash ticket, no checked bag, insisting on first class. I've seen the pattern before, Captain. I was following what?" Doyle's voice didn't rise, which somehow made it land harder across the gate than shouting would have. "A hunch? Because that's what this looks like from where I'm standing. A hunch, and a man who did nothing but ask you to check your own system." Meg's jaw tightened. She glanced toward the small crowd still gathered along the ropes, phones raised, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to notice how many of them there actually were. "You don't know this passenger," she said. "I know exactly who this passenger is." Doyle let the words settle before he went on. 22 years ago, I was a second lieutenant." He paused. Nobody at the gate moved. "Marcus Whitfield trained me." A murmur started somewhere near the ropes. Near the back, the businessman who'd whispered about cash tickets 20 minutes earlier leaned toward the woman beside him again, quieter this time. "Wait," he said. "Then why was he being removed?" Nobody answered him. Nobody had an answer that didn't implicate someone standing at that gate. "He's the reason I'm standing in this uniform today," Doyle said. The silence that followed had a different weight than the one before it. Not curiosity now, but the sound of a room recalculating everything it thought it understood about the last 15 minutes. Travis was still standing close enough to Marcus that he hadn't fully stepped back yet. His hand, empty now, opened and closed once at his side. "Sir," he said, low, meant for Marcus alone. "I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him and said nothing. He didn't need to. Travis had done in the end exactly what mattered. He'd stopped. Dale still had the radio in his hand, the one he'd used to call in a fraud alert that had gone out to gate operations, to security, to anyone monitoring that channel across the terminal. He stared at it now like it belonged to someone else. "I just repeated what she told me to say," he said, to no one in particular, or maybe to himself. Nobody looked at him. That was somehow worse than if they had. "So no," Doyle said, turning back to Meg. "I'm not closing that cabin door until he's on this aircraft. And I'd start thinking hard about how you're going to explain the last 15 minutes to people a lot less forgiving than I am." Meg's hands tightened around the torn boarding pass. "The reservation looked irregular," she said. "Cash, same day, no history with the airline. I've caught actual fraud before doing exactly what I did today. I don't apologize for being careful." "Careful," Priya said from behind the podium. "Would have taken 2 minutes to check the system. You had 2 minutes. You had 15. Meg didn't answer that. She looked instead at the small crowd of phones still pointed her way. as if only now understanding that every version of the next 30 seconds was going to exist somewhere permanent, replayed by people who had never stood at this gate and never would. "I was doing my job," she said, quieter now, mostly to herself. "No," Priya said, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been all afternoon. "You were doing what you always do. I've watched you do it before. I just never said anything." Nobody in the gate spoke for a moment. The overhead speaker clicked once, as if the airport itself had run out of things to announce. Doyle turned to Marcus. "Let's get you on board. Your seat's exactly where it should be." Marcus didn't move immediately. He looked down at the torn pieces of paper still scattered near the podium. Pale, ordinary, worth nothing at all now, except as proof of the last 15 minutes. And something in the set of his shoulders eased, not with relief exactly, but with the particular calm of a man who has just watched the truth catch up to a lie in front of enough witnesses that it can't be taken back. "There's a girl in Los Angeles waiting on a phone call," he said. "I'd like to make my flight." "You're going to make it," Doyle said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Meg stood alone at the podium, still holding two torn halves of paper that meant nothing now, except everything. Somewhere behind her, a phone stopped recording. Its owner was already typing a caption, already choosing which 15 seconds of this the rest of the world was about to see first. The clip was online before the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Someone near the ropes had uploaded the full 15 minutes, unedited, and within an hour it had been cut down, captioned, and passed along by people who had never set foot in that terminal. By the time Marcus landed in Los Angeles, the video had a name attached to it that wasn't his. Strangers were calling it the JFK boarding pass video, and Meg Carter's face was the one appearing in the thumbnail. The airline's corporate office issued a statement before noon the next day, careful and clipped in the way statements like that always are. An internal review had been opened. The employee involved had been placed on leave pending investigation. Nobody used the word fired yet, but everyone reading it understood the sentence was only a matter of phrasing. The review didn't stop at one afternoon. Once investigators started pulling records, they found 4 prior complaints filed against Meg over the past 2 years, each one closed without action, each one describing some version of the same afternoon. A passenger stopped, a story invented, an escalation that started with suspicion and ended in humiliation. None of the earlier complaints had gone anywhere because none of them had a captain stepping off a flight deck to make sure they mattered. Marcus didn't ask for any of it. He hadn't filed a complaint, hadn't called a lawyer, hadn't done anything except make his flight and sit beside his daughter 3 hours later in a hospital consultation room, listening to a surgeon explain a procedure that had nothing to do with airports or boarding passes at all. That was where his attention had been the entire time, even when it hadn't looked that way. What he did instead, once his daughter was out of surgery and resting, was call Elwood's head of operations and ask a single question: how many gates, like A23, were running the same way? The answer took 3 weeks to compile properly. It wasn't the number he'd hoped for. The retraining rolled out across every terminal under Elwood's contract by spring. Not a seminar people sat through once and forgot, but a standing requirement tied to certification. With a direct line passengers could call if they believed they'd been treated unfairly, reviewed by someone outside the gate's own chain of command. Priya was asked to help build it. She said yes before the sentence asking her was finished. Marcus recommended that Travis be retained after the review, noting that he'd corrected his actions the moment he understood the situation. The airline agreed. Travis transferred, eventually, into a role reviewing exactly the kind of incident he'd almost caused. Dale left the company on his own within the month. Nobody pushed him out. He simply stopped showing up one week and didn't return, the way people do when a version of themselves they don't want to look at keeps showing up in their inbox. Meg's employment ended with the investigation. Whether she believed she'd been treated unfairly no longer mattered as much as the record left behind. The footage, and the complaints that followed it, spoke more clearly than either side of the story ever could. 5 months later, Marcus walked back through Terminal 4. He wore the same jacket. He always did. It was worn soft in the same places, and he still preferred to move through his own terminals the way any other passenger would, unannounced, unremarkable, watching. At Gate A23, a new agent greeted the line with the kind of ease that can't be trained in a single afternoon, only built over months of doing the job the way it was supposed to be done from the start. Priya stood a few feet away, no longer behind a podium herself, walking two newer agents through a checklist that hadn't existed the last time Marcus had stood in this exact spot. She saw him before he reached the counter. She didn't announce who he was to the agents beside her. She simply crossed over, unhurried, and said, "Mr. Whitfield, good to see you again." "You changed this gate," he said. It wasn't a question. "We changed a lot of them," she said. "This one just happened first." He nodded once, the way he did when a thing had been done right and didn't need further comment. He didn't ask to see the training materials, or the new complaint line, or the numbers behind the retraining program. He'd already seen the version of this gate that mattered. A girl who'd once been told to sit down and stayed silent. Now the reason nobody had to. Nobody looked twice as Marcus handed over his boarding pass. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, exactly as it always should have. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what moment changed everything for you? And if you don't want to miss the next unforgettable story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.